तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Namaste, my dear friends. This is video number 3 on Atma Bodha of Bhagwan Sri Adi Shankaracharya. This video starts with stanza number 20. Atam Chaitanyam Asritah देह इंद्रिये मनोधिये सब क्रियार्थेषु वर्तन्ते सूर्यलोकम यथा जनः। आत्म चैतन्यम vitality of consciousness आश्रितः depending upon देह इंद्रिये मनोधिये body senses mind and intellect सब क्रियार्थेषु in their respective activities Vartante, engage Suryalokam, light of the sun, Yatha, just as Janaha, people. Depending upon the energy or vitality of consciousness, Atam Chaitanya, the body, senses, mind, and intellect engage themselves in their respective activities just as men work depending upon the light of the sun. Every one of the equipments, body, mind, and intellect, functions in its own definite sphere, and each one of it depends entirely upon that power, Atma Chaitanya, which by its mere presence kindles life in matter and makes it look as though sentient. The power of electricity is one, but its fields of operation are different. Without electricity, even if we have all the bulbs and switches in their proper places, we do not get any manifestation. Likewise, without the enlivening Atma, no activity is possible in this world, and all the objects of creation would then be, without its grace, a dead weight of matter, hanging heavily around like stone, inert, dark, and devoid of any symptom of life and hope. It is that which makes up the life in all, at once dynamic, gay, energetic, and beaming with attraction, although in itself it is not affected by the things and happenings of life which it illumines in its shining presence divine. The illustration here is from the various activities that start with the rising of the sun in the east. Whatever be the thoughts and actions of an individual who faces the day, the sun which illumines the earth is not affected by the happiness or sorrow of those who are here in this world. It simply illumines whatever part of the globe comes before its power of illumination. So too, at the touch of the illumining glory of the Self, Atma, Chaitanya, the outer world of activity is vitalized. The Self never gets mixed up with anything which it vitalizes. Whatever be the situation which the sun is illumining, some bleeding war or some boiling tar, the sun neither gets red nor black. The sunlight need never get boiled up with the prevailing sense of hate or heat. Stanza number 21. देह इंद्रिय गुणान कर्मा मले सच्चिदान आत्मनि अध्यस अत्यंत विवेकेन गगने नीलता दिवत. देह इंद्रिय गुणान, qualities of the body and senses, karmani, actions, amle, pure, satchida atmani, on the atma, the absolute existence knowledge, adhyanti, superimpose, avivaken, by lack of discrimination, gagne, in the sky, neelt, divat, blue color, and the like. Fools, because they lack in their power of discrimination, superimpose on the Atma, the absolute existence, knowledge, Sat, Chit, all the varied functions of the body and the senses, just as they attribute blue color and the like to the sky, because they lack in their powers of right discrimination, the qualities of the body, mind, intellect, the limitations of the physical and subtle body are superimposed by the ignorant on the pure self. Thereafter, the deluded mistake this real self to be one possessing all the imperfections of the superimposed equipments. This non-discrimination, aviveka, is like the misconception which makes children believe that the sky is blue when actually it has no color. Not only the blueness but the concavity of the sky, murkiness, misty looks, dusty conditions are all often considered as conditions of the sky. In fact, space appears as having these qualities, but space as such has none of them. An object is not affected by the traits superimposed upon it, and here, when we superimpose certain characteristics of the body and mind on the self-effulgent being, the truth itself is not affected by such misconceived notions and attributes. The blueness perceived is the experience of our limited vision when it looks at the endless summer sky. Stanza number 22. अज्ञान अन्मान सोपाधे कर्तृदिनी चातमनि कल्पयन्ते अम्बुगते चंद्रे चलनादि यथाम्भस्य. Ajnanat, through ignorance, mansopadhe, of the mind which is a upadhi, kritvadini, agency of action, etc., cha, and atamni, on the self, kalpyante, contribute, ambugate, which is reflected in the water, chandre, in the moon, chalnadi, tremblings, etc., yatha, just as, ambhas, of the water. The tremblings that belong to the waters are attributed through ignorance to the reflected moon dancing on it. Likewise, agency of action, of enjoyment, and of other limitations which really belong to the mind are delusively understood as the nature of the self Atma. The ideas I am the enjoyer, I am the doer are of the intellect. These different ideas such as I am this, I am that, etc. arise in the mind only when we are in the midst of the activities of the work a day world and of the dream world. For when we are in deep sleep, we do not have any such ideas. It is only when the mind is available for perception and cognition that we come to know of the things cognized. As long as we identify ourselves with the mind, so long alone can we claim to have the dual experiences in these planes of existence. But when once we have withdrawn ourselves from the mental plane and are in a state of pure consciousness, samadhi, we realize that all the thoughts and emotions and activities of the intellect, mind, and body are not in the self, nor are they of the self. The delusory reflection of the consciousness in the mental pool which agitates with the panting egoistic ideas of I am the doer, I am the enjoyer, etc., cease when there are no more any thought eruptions therein. The example here is of an image of the moon reflected in a bucket of water which seems to shiver when the water surface is disturbed. When the water calms down and becomes steady, we do not see the shattered moon in the bucket of water reassembling to form one whole. Similarly, when one has purified one's mind and has consolidated its strength and has reconstructed it to be firm and steady by narrowing down its various unholy, unhelpful, and selfish, selfish thoughts, the glory of the self gets automatically reflected in all its beauty within oneself, unshaken by the dualities around and the consequent agitations. Stanza number 23. राग इच्छा सुख दुखादि बुद्धौ सत्यां प्रवर्तते सुसुप्तौ नास्ति तन्नाशे तस्मात् बुद्धेस्तु न आत्मनः. राग अटैचमेंट, इच्छा डिजायर, सुख प्लेजर, दुखादि पेन etc. बुद्धौ सत्याम when mind or intellect functions, pravartate are perceived, susuptau in deep sleep, ne not asti is, tannashe at the destruction of it mind, tasmat therefore buddhe of the mind to only, ne not atmaneh of the atma. Attachment, desire, pleasure, pain, etc. are perceived to exist so long as buddhi or mind functions. They are not perceived in deep sleep when the mind ceases to exist. Therefore, they belong to the mind alone and are not to the Atman. There is no place for ignorance in the blissful existence of the Self which is omniscient and omnipresent. How can there be darkness before light, and how can the passions that arise in the mind come to stay with the Atman? It is the avidya of the individual, his desire for pleasure and his attachment to the fruits of his actions that deludes him to the bondage of samsara. A pure mind leads one to greater glory and happiness and ultimately to liberation. through the final experience of the true knowledge, whilst the same mind drags the individual down to lower births when it groans in ajnana. Therefore, if we deal suitably with the turbulent mind and quieten its righteous activities, the Self is revealed in its infinite glory with no blemish of the Jivatvam in him, and remember, attachment, desire, etc. are of the mind and not of the Atman. So long as we are functioning through our mind, we are under the tyranny of attachment, desire, pleasure, pains, etc. But in deep sleep, when temporarily our minds are not effective in ourselves, all these tyrannies are at an end. When I look through a pair of green goggles, everything looks green. When I look at things with my naked eye, there is no green color. Therefore, the greenness is due to the glasses. So too, all these negative tendencies belong to the mind and are perceived only through the mind. They are not of the Atman. Stanza 24. प्रकाशोर्कस्य तोयस्य सेतैर्मग्ने तोषमता स्वभाव सच्चिदानंद नित्य निर्मल आत्मन. Prakash, luminosity, Arkasya of the sun, Toyasya for water, Shaitam, coolness, Agni for fire, Yatha, just as, Ushanata, heat, Swabhava, nature, Sat, reality, Chit, consciousness, Anand, bliss, Nitya, eternity, Nirmalta, purity, Atamneh, of the Atman. Just as luminosity is the nature of the sun, coolness of water, and heat of fire, so too the nature of the Atman is eternity, purity, reality, consciousness, and bliss. Whether it is the human personality or the plant specimen or animal entity, no one wants to die or suffer any agony and pain. Instead, there is a positive effort at all times for the acquisition of knowledge and the enjoyment of pleasure and for the self-preservation of the individuality. Nothing can remain away from its essential nature, dharma. There cannot be cool fire or a dark sun. Every object must express its own essential nature. The sun is luminosity itself, which it shows out. The heat of the fire is well known, and no one has come across a cold ball of fire. Similarly, if at all Atman is to be defined in terms of its nature, we can only say that it is that which is eternal, Nitya. Every pure Nirmala and existence, knowledge, bliss, Sat, Chit, Anand. Stanza number 25. Atmaneh Satchidantascha Buddharvartirti Dvayam Sanyojay Cha Viveken Janamiti Parvartate. Atmaneh of the self, Sachidansah the existence, knowledge, aspect, Cha and Buddhi of the intellect, Virti the thought wave, Itihi thus, Davyam the two, Sanyoja blending, Cha and Aviveken through indiscrimination, Janami I know, Iti thus, Parvartate functions. By the indiscriminate blending of the two, the existence, knowledge aspect of the self and the thought wave of the intellect, there arises the notion of I know. The Atman is self-effulgent and mind is inert matter. Without the power of illumination in consciousness, the mind would be inert and powerless to feel, for without this awareness within, we will not be conscious of our own thoughts. At the same time, a marriage between these two contradictory things is impossible, and therefore any alliance between the two is only at best a delusory superimposition. The experience I know is thus produced only when a feeling or thought stands bathed in the light of consciousness. Each thought is considered as a wave-like disturbance in the mental stuff. When these waves of thoughts arise in us, they are illumined by our awareness. When we cry, I know, I understand, I feel, etc., the sun rises and then the waves of the sea are seen and experienced. The sunlight falls on all surfaces equally. Like a silken veil, it lies on every surface, and when the waves rise, the light veil yields, embracing the waves on all sides, illumining it. So too, in our inner bosom, the light of consciousness illumines the height, breadth, and depth of each thought. The mind intellect equipment stands ever exposed to the eternal self and its light of awareness. When through the sense organs the stimuli from external world reach the bosom, the mind with the help of the knowledge acquired by it in the past produces its responses, which in their turn are expressed in the actions. Life is an unbroken series of experiences, and therefore the individual is called upon to respond to it constantly, to know the happiness and to know how to meet them, to know the happenings and to know how to meet them is the contents and purpose of man's intellectual life. Self is knowledge absolute. It is knowledge itself. In it there is nothing else that is to be known. It is the only one subject without any object to be known. As such, in itself, it has nothing to know. Yet We are experiencing the intellectual life of constantly knowing how. This is the subject explained in this stanza. It is the theory in Vedanta that the knowledge of things is gained not in the direct light of consciousness, but it is in the beam of consciousness reflected in the mind. I will explain it with the help of an illustration. Suppose there is a storeroom in your house which is ever in darkness. One day you realized that the room was extremely well illumined. Why? There was a bucket of water on the veranda where the sunlight got reflected and threw a pool of light on the dark wall of the room. If your little son were to come at the time to play with the bucket of water, the illumination in the dark room will disappear. For when the reflecting medium is disturbed, the reflected light is splashed about and the room is again in the dark until the reflection rehabilitates itself on the wall. So too the self never illumines the objects directly, but the light of consciousness reflected on our intellect throws out a beam of reflected consciousness which illumines the objects and gives us the experience. I know that is why even a man of intelligence, when vexed with some worry, cannot think properly or understand easily. His power of understanding or thinking is clouded when the mind is disturbed. Thus, when the mental pool rises in thought waves, the light of the self illumines them. Thoughts dressed in consciousness is the clear experience. I know feelings and ideas in our bosom glittering in consciousness are our knowledge of things. Anger, knowledge, etc. are all characteristics of the mind and they are thus attributed to the Atman due to lack of discrimination. The nature of the Atman in reality is Sat Chit Ananda, and this eternal self does not undergo any change even when the individual experiences anger, pain, pleasure, etc. in his mind. Stanza 26. Atamno vikriya nasti buddhirbodho ne जावत प्रीति जीव है श्रवमलम ज्ञातवा ज्ञाता दृष्टेति मुह्यति. Atmanah for the self, vikriya action, ne not, asti is, buddhi for the intellect, buddha capacity to experience, intelligence, ne not, jatu at all, iti thus, जो वह the जीव the individuality. Sarvam, everything, alam, enough, Gyatva, knowing, Gyata, the knower, Drashta, the seer, Iti, thus, Muhyati, deludes. Atman never does anything, and the intellect of its own accord has no capacity to experience I know, but the individuality in us delusorily thinks he is himself the seer and the knower. Human intellect by itself is not endowed with the powers of feeling, thinking, willing, or wishing, because it is a product of matter which is inert and insentient. A bulb in itself has no light without it being wedded to the electric current. Atman is knowledge itself, and it is not affected by the mental thoughts and physical actions. The individuality, jiva, which is a reflection of the pure consciousness in the mind, in its ignorance, avidya of its true nature, falsely identifies itself with the body, mind, intellect equipment, and it comes to superimpose the characteristics of the true self on these insentient matter envelopments. In this way, the delusion that one is a seer, knower, etc., arises in the ego, all because of a false notion in itself. The substratum for all these changing phenomena is that changeless Atman. This world of plurality with different names and forms seems to rise and fall like waves on the ocean. It is an illusion experienced upon that substratum, adhisthana, painted by the fancy of the confused ego. Just as the waves are in and of the ocean only, and they do not stand even for a moment apart from the oceanic waters, so also the entire waves of creation is in and of that absolute supreme and have no separate existence in themselves. This supreme being is the Atman who stands ever unaffected in the least by the changes caused in the arena of time, space, and causality. The illuminating consciousness because of which there is an awareness of the various objects and activities of the inner mind is that supreme reality. This, thus, though waves after waves of sorrow, dejection, despair, joy, success, anger, jealousy, or passion may come in the mind, he who knows the knower of these waves is not affected by them. Why should the sun dim because of the tragedies he is illumining, or glow the brighter where he is illumining a joyous scene? The self I am. I am illumining my mental conditions. I know I am happy or unhappy. But these are the mental waves that I am illumining. I am the light of consciousness. None of the conditions of the mind is me. This is the constant wisdom of the wise man. Stanza number 27. Rajju sarv vad atmanam jivo gyatva bhayam vahet na ahem jivah pratmeti ज्ञातस्य निर्भयो भवेत्. Rajju Sarapvat, like a serpent in a rope, Atmanam, oneself, Jivaha, the ego, Gyatva, considering, Bhayam, fear, Vahet, carries or is overcome, nay not, Ahem, I, Jivaha, the individuality or the ego, Pratma, the Supreme Self, iti, thus, gyatah, having understood, chetah, if, nirbhay, fearless, bhavet, can be, just as the person who regards a rope as a snake is overcome by the fear, so also one considering oneself as the ego, jiva, is overcome by fear. The egocentric individuality in us regains fearlessness by realizing that it is not a jiva but is itself the supreme soul. The superimposition of a snake vision on a rope takes place only when the existence of the rope is not perceived. Once a misapprehension starts, it multiplies itself in its own imaginations into 1,000 baseless notions, and the individual, under his own delusions, suffers the consequences thereof, just as the vision of the snake gives us perceptions of the details of the snake, the pain of its bite, the fear of the death that will be caused by the snake on the rope. In the non-apprehension of the self, the misapprehension of the gross physical body, mind, etc. are perceived as real, and in this misunderstanding the confused ego is born to suffer its own illusory sorrows. We are not the limited individuality as we take ourselves to be. There is a limitless region of experience beyond what is known at present, and this is shut out from us because of our self-centered existence. When the realization of the true nature of the self comes to one, even as mere theoretical knowledge, he who was till he who was till then in a perpetual state of fear and sorrow seems to wake up from his own limited existence and rediscovers itself to be the blissful self which is all pervading and eternal. If and when thereafter there is an outward cognition of any experience, such a Mahatman of self-realization cannot but see the same matter equipments of experiences which were before his own singing the eternal song of life. Stanza number 28. Atma avbhasyate ko बुद्ध्यादिनी इंद्रियाण्यपि दीपो घटादि वत्स आत्मा जड़ै नर्भाष्यते. Atma, the self, avbhashyati illumines ekah single buddhyadini intellect etc. indriyani sense organs api also deepah lamp ghatadi divat like the pots etc. Savatma itself jadahi inert tai by themselves nay not avbhashyate illumined. Just as a lamp illumines a jar or pot, so also the Atman illumines the mind and the sense organs, etc. These material objects by themselves cannot illumine themselves because they are inert. The street lamp is a silent, unperturbed witness of all that happens under its light, whether it is a marriage procession or a funeral march. The light, unmoved by the feelings of joy or sorrow, sheds its glow on all those that come under it. The postman is unconcerned with the nature and contents of the communication he delivers to the addressee. In fact, we ourselves are unconcerned with the different experiences of a co-passenger when we get into a train or bus, and we never consider his loss or gain as our own, although we may sympathize with his lot and help him. The sorrow is only illumined by us. The self in us is the one illuminating factor, the pure awareness, which alone illumines both the good and the bad in us at all times. What mind does not comprehend, but what makes the mind cognize, know that to be Brahma and not what people worship, says the Upanishad, the one power on account of which the physical activities and the mental yearnings and intellectual throbbings become vivid and living for us. The matter combinations may vary in their endless variety, in their strength, vitality, and energy, but the one spirit which, through all these different manifestations of matter, does not change at all, is the one and only glory which gives the glitter of a show to the entire Jagat, a lively show indeed. Stanza number 29. Saubodhe na अन्य बोधिच्छा बोध रूपतया आत्मनः न दीपस्या अन्य दीपेच्छा यथा सव आत्म प्रकाशने. Saubodhe, to know itself, ne, not, अन्य bodhicha, need for other knowledge, bodh rooptaya, because its form is knowledge itself, atamneh, one's own, ne, not, deepasya, for a lamp, अन्य deepecha, need for another lamp, yatha, just as, sav atam prakashne, to illumine itself. A lighted lamp does not need another lamp to illuminate its light. So too, Atman, which is knowledge itself, needs no other knowledge to know it. Light is necessary to see the furniture in the dark room of a house, but to see the very light which illumines the furniture, do we require any other light? We do not call for the aid of any other light to see the very sun that illumines all the objects in the world, because the sun itself is illumination complete. To understand, realize, and experience the self, the illuminating light in all our experiences, in fact, in all beings at all times. No other light is necessary because this itself alone is the real, and this self alone lights up the knowledge of the entire creation, known and unknown. This self is the all-aware consciousness absolute. If we remove the furniture, etc., from the presence of the light does not cease to exist. Similarly, even if all the objects in this world, if all our experiences in the waking, dream, and deep sleep states have ended, even then the awareness shall keep on shining as ever before, because the Atman is eternal and self-effulgent. To know this source of all light, no other light is necessary. The outer world of objects is illumined as long as I am extrovert. The moment I turn inward and my attention is introvert, I realize that that light alone is the real one which illumines the entire experiences everywhere, not only in my own bosom, but in the entire world of beings. Whatever be the technique which we adopt, we are bound to realize this reality if we faithfully follow the path laid down by the learned sages and experienced seers. The intellect cannot comprehend the one homogeneous whole because it is not an object of cognition. With a telescope, I cannot see myself. I can only see other objects in front of me and round about me. Similarly, so long as the intellect is there, it is indeed very useful to discriminate, to reason out, to analyze, and to understand the objects and happenings in a field other than the intellect itself. Now, when we try to understand the transcendental truth with that limited intellect in an objective way, the intellect is only trying to achieve the impossible and the impracticable, as the self is the subject that illumines the very intellect itself. The gross body is an object of experience. The subtle mind is something separate from and subtler than this gross equipment. The intellect is still subtler, and yet even this also is an object experienced by us. When we thus move more and more into the inward chambers in ourselves, we almost reach the subtlest of the thought existence, the intellectual field for the play of our ideas and ideologies, such as I know, I understand, etc. When these thought waves sleep down, when there is nothing for the consciousness to illumine at that rare and sacred moment, the pure consciousness alone remains, illumining itself as a silent street lamp at midnight stands illumining itself. In terms of the familiar analogy of the dreamer is none other than the waker, as the dreamer himself, when he wakes up from his dream, rediscovers himself to be the waker. So too in the supreme plane of self-awareness and bliss, when all duality has ended therein, when I remain in my own real nature to understand, realize, and experience that bliss of self, Svarupananda, no other illumination is necessary. It is a question of one awakening oneself to that state of God consciousness, the selfhood. So I conclude this video at this stage. Next video number 4 will start with stanza number 30. Thank you. Namaskar.